Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today on the follow-up session to the Turning Point Summit. This is being hosted today by the Youth Working Group of the World House Project, along with the DIAS. And today we have gathered here together to celebrate the International Day of Education as a part of the Learning Planet Festival. And the Learning Planet Festival is an annual celebration of education, educators, by the Learning Planet Institute and UNESCO. So this is a very important moment that we have all gathered together to follow up on the Turning Point Summit itself. So a warm welcome to all of you. So today in our session, the aim of the session is essentially to look back at the summit, look at the important outcomes of the summit itself, what happened during the summit, and we have been joined by some wonderful young leaders who were part of the summit itself, who will be presenting those outcomes. And so we will be introducing those speakers in the coming time. And we will also be hearing from our organizing team, and then we will go into an informal discussion with everyone in terms of what lies ahead. So I'm really glad that some of our friends and colleagues have also joined the call. So I will begin a basic introduction to the summit itself. So that, as we all know, that the Turning Point Summit was hosted by the World House Project Group and the DIAS to mark the International Day of Non-Violence between the 2nd and the 7th of October 2022. And it started with a pre-summit workshop led by Dr. Johnny Mack that happened in the month of September. And then we had a series of events during the International Day for Non-Violence from the 2nd October till the 7th of October. Again, like that was, which had Youth Assembly for Non-Violence and Peace. We had another very incredible workshop on youth for youth on non-violence. Thereafter, we had a co-creation session, which was again, I think, a very, very important one, because that co-creation session led to the youth-led strategy that we are still now implementing together as a group. And we also had artistic performance by a very good artist on peace and non-violence. And thereafter, we, as a Turning Point Summit, we started follow-up actions. So that was the scope of the first edition of the Turning Point Summit. In terms of the general participation of the summit, I think we had a very diverse sort of participation. We had 66 participants from 16 different countries. And again, like some really wonderful experts. And it was like a very comprehensive engagement with 20 hours of engagement during the entire summit online, I think, which is itself a very hard task for even the participants. So kudos and gratitude to all who were a key part of that. The key outcomes of the summit included a youth declaration on non-violence that arose out of the Youth Assembly, and followed by which we had the co-creation session where the youth-led strategy on non-violence was adopted by the summit. So these two documents will also be shared by our group today. Now moving forward, I think, like, beyond numbers, it's important to actually see the experience of our participants. So we had Nabila, for instance, who's a youth leader from Afghanistan. And she thought that the summit had empowered, the Youth Assembly had empowered the leaders of next generation to develop global competence and skills in transforming their vision for a better future. And then we hear, for instance, from Ganga, who talked about learning about the layers of how the society and sort of changing a layer will inevitably affect how nonviolence is being demonstrated. So we can see that a more subjective experience here of the participants of the summit. We also have testimonials from the youth co-creation session. And again, like Rahat talks about the process of understanding the process of revolutionizing the value systems within the society. And similarly, we have Ed, our colleague, again from Learning Planet, who also shared again his reflections for shaping a non-violent world. So we are resolved to again build forward on these experiences, and definitely have a Turning Point Summit 2023 along with all our partner stakeholders. A few of the follow-up actions which had emerged out of the summit included using digital media for storytelling around non-violence to engage young people, setting up youth clubs at schools and universities and getting more young people involved, creating material and workshops on non-violence, which most importantly is led by young people in the language of the young people. So beyond that, again, like I'm so glad that in the follow-up actions, we are already on point 5, we are already at the Learning Planet Festival and in this gathered here in the session today. There were a few people who were extremely integral to our event. And I think, again, like a big thank you to all of them here. And again, like all the organizations which were, again, like very important. So I'd like to thank the World House Project, Nonviolence International, Learning Planet, Generation Global, Tony Blair Institute, Community Arts Network, again, Gandhi Foundation in Peter Mallisburg, and Dr. Claiborne Carson's office for their support. Before I hand it over to the next set of speakers, I also want to just take us through, beyond these words, the visual glimpses of the summit. So we have, and I'm so happy that we have some of our members from that day here on the screen today. So this was from, I think, the co-creation session, and then we have a workshop. This was from the first day of the Youth Assembly. So we have Dr. Johnny Mack, Dr. Claiborne Carson, our esteemed speakers. So this was again a very important youth-led panel, where we had youth leaders from around the world who had gathered together and reflected on how they're using non-violence in their own domains and what they have learned. So having said that, now I think it's good to hear from our actual leaders of the summit who came up with the outcomes, who were responsible for the outcomes. So the first presentation that's being made will be by Ms. Rahat Verma and Mr. Rahul. These are again both young leaders from India who were integral in designing the co-creation strategy. So I will request you both to please take the floor and present the youth-led strategy to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshav. So just a brief of what was the co-creation session. After we had gone through a workshop with Dr. Johnny Mack, we were thinking very deeply on the issues of violence and how non-violent action could be presented to the world. And 3 groups came together to create 3 documents in the co-creation session, which were titled From Chaos to Community, Education and Non-Violence, and Environment and Sustainability. So I'll briefly tell you what the themes are in each of the documents. The first is, fittingly, the 3 documents identified 3 core issues, which were that are essentially impeding human progress towards a non-violent world community. The first is that our society has an almost instinctual emphasis on divisions. The second is the lack of a structure that supports the development of the non-violent value systems in individuals, and that the current education system has insufficiencies that allows for the perpetuation of violent cycles. This co-creation document that's on your screen in its entirety, you will find calls for an increased emphasis on association between the you and I, instead of the current focus on the difference between you and I. We will be working towards building an understanding that I cannot exist without you. Our strategy will begin with a focus on all age groups in order to inculcate awareness about biases. For this purpose, our long-term goal is developing comprehensive school curriculums that includes modules to facilitate an understanding of an individual's environment, including all verticals from climate change to human collaboration. The immediate action propositions that we have already sort of undertaken, they're in their nascent stage, is the first is like we're creating educational workshops for all age groups on nonviolence. The primary idea here is to build a new vocabulary of nonviolence, in the sense that we will be mentoring young students to go and talk to their peers about these, lead workshops, lead sessions, essentially, so that the conversation is not limited to, let's say, professors, to activists. It is a universal language. Another strategy that we're in the process of coming up with is the use of social media. In the long term, we are looking to create a repository of human interest stories along two verticals: direct violence and structural violence, which is one vertical, and the second is the voices of non-violent resistance. We are trying to show the world what another person's experience of violence looks like, and also at the same time show them what non-violent civil resistance can do. In all the three co-creation documents that come together as one, you will find that there is a very deep emphasis on enhancing the knowledge base of the world society when it comes to the adoption of non-violence. We want to effectively build a system that negates the notion that non-violence is not an effective response or a measure which cannot stand against violence. And it is a value system that essentially everybody should inculcate. We come across these instances of young children learning about moral values. There are lesson plans that are entirely conditioned on the idea that you have to be a good person, that you have to hold the other person with a dignity. And they're suddenly lost the moment we're older than 5 or 6. We're trying to bring back that idea to all age groups. I think Rahul will take us through the strategies of all three documents, essentially what each of them talks about specifically in terms of different sectors. Rahul, please.
Yes. Thank you, Rahat, for such a fruitful introduction. So, as we've discussed earlier, the main idea behind rooting out all violence from the normal human functioning society is to root out the violence in the first place, in order to create a perception of people that might not be threatening to each other. And so, in order to execute this in a tangible manner, we came up with the few pointers for a strategy. Now, this particular strategy revolves around the main idea that this human experience should have an explanation into their own self. Everyone should confront what the other person might be going through, right? So, in our strategies, we first confronted that we need to create a repository. Let's say we need to create a hard drive of actual real human stories who might have confronted direct violence or structural violence in their day-to-day lives, and how they have come across it, and how they survived it, how they endured it. If you encourage a society to confront the actual existence and realities of what violence can do to you in real life, and what violence is doing to so many people and it has affected, that then we are hoping that it might lead to a consciousness that is aware of how much hurt we are causing to other people, and you eventually will lead more towards how we can create a society which roots out violence from its core itself. The other strategies that involved would be, we came up with the idea that we might create workshops. Now these workshops were to be for all ages, to introduce individuals, to the process of self-inquiry, as is stated above. Now the process of self-inquiry includes that you question yourself first, and then you question the other person next after that. You encounter your own flaws, and you understand the reason of why rage or anger or violence would be an exit strategy for you at a particular point of time where you might want to exercise violence. So we came up with the idea of why we create systematic workshops where you would disseminate information, where you will have to confront yourself and your inner feelings and your inner persona, and to confront the violent self, and to understand it, systemize it, tame it. Similarly, we came up that there's the third point that says that organization of interfaith dialogues and intercultural festivals under the umbrella of exchange, similar to like this. Now, in order to bring people together on a peaceful agenda, and in order to keep engage them in dialogue, engage them to and expose them to other people's opinion, in a peaceful atmosphere, in a safe atmosphere where you remember that your interests will be safeguarded and you're entitled to it. So organizing interfaith events as well as intercultural festivals where you might meet a lot of people would be a good step towards our main goal and towards our main agenda. Similarly, there's coordination of simulation exercises with children and young adults, because the first impression of a children, the early impressions for children and similarly like-minded ages, it is very essential for their development and how they, mold their personalities towards their atmosphere. And so what is demanded of them is what is expected of them and the pressure that the society puts on them. So in order to completely root out violence in the future societies in the coming generations, it is very essential for us to reach out to the younger generation, especially the very younger kids, and to make them, not essentially understand true, results of how much loss and how much fear and anger can real violence lead you to, but to make them understand why violence is not desired in a fruitful and a socially peaceful society. So I guess I have covered the most part of what our strategies in the Youth Led Declaration was. Thank you for inviting me, Keshav sir and Devesh sir. Thank you, Rahat, for being a co-speaker.
Keshav, if you would scroll down, we'll just have a conversation about the education and non-violence perspective. Like I said, there were 3 themes that were there. This is one of them. Education is something that we are putting a lot of stress on at all levels. It is a process of learning as well as unlearning, in the sense that we're teaching the young ones to actually understand the language that they're using to condone violence, and also teaching them a new vocabulary of non-violence at the same time. The unlearning processes are for people who've gone beyond the school systems, the education systems, and they believe that they're viewing the world in a manner which is very violent. We're trying to show them that violence is not always the option. We're trying to essentially construct relationships which are non-oppressive. We are trying to create an environment which promotes peace education as well as peace culture. And in the third document, we'll find that there is a certain amount of emphasis that we put on the relationship between the people and the planet as well. So we're not just looking at non-violence as a value system for human relationships. We're looking at non-violence as a value system for how an individual reacts and interacts with the planet. So these are the 3 things that essentially are the main strategy document. We are building on these action strategies as we speak. We have already gotten involved in doing 2 of them. We're hoping to do more of them, and we invite you all to participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahat and Rahul, for your lovely presentation and all your continued work actually to this end. I think before we go to our next segment about the Youth Assembly and the Declaration, if there are any speakers or participants who have any reactions, questions for our speakers, we will be opening the floor for a brief discussion as well. So there's anyone who has any comments to make or any questions, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and kindly ask or convey your points. Okay. So yes, Nikhil, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't have any questions, but I do have some comments to make. First off, I think the document is a great success, and I really love the points in which you guys had mentioned how important it is to learn and unlearn things. I do believe that up to a certain extent, in order to fully inculcate yourself with the ideology of non-violence, you do have to unlearn some certain principles which the world of the new age has set upon us. That was one point which really shook my breath away. And overall, all the principles and every single thing which was mentioned in the document was completely on point. And overall, the presentation was just great, which really made me give another look and have another thought about non-violence. So that was something which really hit the spot for me, and that's all.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. If we can also invite David Hart to make a few comments on this. The reason being that David was our key guide in that session. So just David, if recollecting your general reactions and your experience during that presentation, we can put you on the spot and request you to hear from you.
I'm not sure what to share at this stage. I'm glad to be with all of you, thrilled that this youth-led project is continuing and growing. There's a lot to discuss in the content that you've raised, and I want to hear from all of you. If there's specific things I can be helpful on, I never hold anything back. I'm happy to share my perspective, whether popular or not, but I'm not sure how to be most helpful here.
No, thank you. I think, David, all our work is incomplete without your guidance. So it's great to have you here with us on this also. So
glad to be with this wonderful group.
And also just for those who weren't there in the Turning Point Summit at that point, I think David had highlighted the entire co-creation summit began with David Hart's very, very moving, passionate, and insightful keynote address. So David, just also again, like, gratitude to you for that.
Yeah, my sense is that I shared there, and I think many of you heard it. I think the world's facing a series of interrelated crises, and a lot of people are not facing the crises. And I think this is because we fear what we're feeling, and that we have to find a way to face our fears and overcome them. And I see all of you doing that, looking hard at the reality of the world as it is and thinking about positive things we can do. So there's a lot to unpack within each of the proposals, but my overall sense is gratitude that this wonderful group of young leaders cares and is doing something.
Thank you, David, for your words and all your actual support to all of us. I think then we will be moving forward with our youth assembly, and Devesh was the coordinator for the youth assembly, so he will be sharing some insights, following which we will be having a presentation from Nikhil and Ganga about the outcome document. And I also see we have Simon with us today on the call. So maybe after Devesh, we can also invite Simon to share, because he was again a very important part of that panel that we had, youth-led panel. So Devesh, over to you, please.
Thank you, Keshav, and a very good evening from India to everyone. On the 2nd of October, the International Day of Nonviolence, the Turning Point Summit 2022 Youth Assembly for Nonviolence and Peace brought together young people worldwide to pay tribute to Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Turning Point Summit Youth Assembly aimed to provide youth participants the education and tools to take action towards a positive nonviolent change in their lives and communities, and further aimed for participants to identify and develop their commitments to nonviolence as actionable steps. Before the summit, the Youth Assembly's participants worked closely with each other for a month to develop a youth declaration for nonviolence. For this purpose, the participants were organized into 5 working groups, which were Youth Working Group on Education and Nonviolence, Youth Working Group on Religion and Nonviolence, Youth Working Group on Workspaces and Nonviolence, Youth Working Group on Civil Society and Nonviolence, and Youth Working Group on World Politics and Nonviolence. Before the summit on the 10th and 11th of September, our team had hosted pre-summit workshops and orientation programs. The sessions focused on building understanding of various aspects of nonviolence and peace. The sessions were facilitated by Dr. Johnny Mack, Associate Director of the World House Project, along with the Turning Point Summit team. The session saw extensive discussions on non-violence, human rights, peace and justice, and social change. The sessions were moderated by Mr. Keshav Gupta, coordinator of the Youth Working Group at the World House Project. Participants during the workshops joined from several countries, including United States of America, Afghanistan, United Kingdom, Egypt, Romania, India, Mexico, Canada, Uganda, and Japan, and brought with them diverse contexts and application of nonviolence, social change, and human rights. The summits were powerful and insightful keynote addresses from Dr. Lester Kurtz from George Mason University, Dr. Johnny Mack, Stanford University, Mr. David Hart from Nonviolence International, which was moderated by Mr. Mike Shelby, an author at Rowman and Littlefield, Canada, and an interactive session with Dr. Claiborne Carlson from Stanford University, and Richa Sharma, an Indian musician and educator. The summit further saw incredible examples of youth leadership through a panel discussion between youth leaders from India, Mexico, Canada, Uganda, and Japan, along with several presentations made by youth leaders during the Youth Assembly. We had Ms. Andrea Robles from Mexico, Mr. Simon Bayangana from Uganda, Mr. Nicholas Thompson from Canada, and Jin Tanaka from Japan. The session was moderated by Mr. Devesh Gupta from India. The key outcomes of the summit included a youth declaration on non-violence and a youth-led strategy on non-violence, both developed by the participants through their collaborative efforts, and was a great example of the benefits of intergenerational solidarity. Thank you, Keshav.
Thank you, Devesh, for this introduction and overview. I think it'll be great if we can also hear from Simon, taking over from Devesh. Simon, again, as I mentioned, is a incredible young leader from Uganda, who joined us again, courtesy Nonviolence International's absolutely amazing, inspiring network globally of youth leaders. And Simon, I would love to invite you to join us and maybe share your experience during the panel and your takeaways during the summit itself. Okay, so Simon, I hope that you do whenever you feel that whenever you can share with us your experiences, then we will be inviting you again to kindly join us. In the meantime, then what we will do is we will be inviting Nikhil to share about the youth declaration that was adopted during the Youth Assembly. And Nikhil, then I invite you to kindly take the floor.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Keshav Bhaiya, for the recognition.
Nikhil, so I see that Simon is here. I know that your discussion is going to take a much longer presentation. So Simon,
Exactly.
if I can kindly invite you to first share your perspectives, and then we will be inviting Nikhil for his presentations.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Gupta, for the invite, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I must say Happy New Year to everyone here. It's we last saw each other last year, and now it's a new year. Yeah, but one thing I want to appreciate is the opportunity you gave us to be part of the youth panel. I think it was very helpful, and also for the good work that you've put up. I've seen like a very kind of detailed work that has been done, I think, and also with clear outcomes. I just like the idea of setting up non-violence groups in colleges, in universities. I think that is really important in building non-violence, like systematically, so that people really understand it right from the grassroots. So I think that's like a good idea. I only wish that we can carry this forward, we can carry this work forward, because I must say that this is the most powerful tool, because we cannot, the people we are trying to work against, the oppressors, have monopolized the use of violence. So the best way is we also have to monopolize the use of non-violence, and it requires a lot of growth, a lot of capacity building, a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of experiential sharing. So moving forward, I think this year we should have a lot of those as we share and learn together, because I think that's the only way we can build ourselves. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I'm always happy and honored to be part of the Turning Point. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to also see David, who has always been supportive in this journey. Yeah. Okay, guys.
Thank you so much, Simon, again for all your inspiring insights previously as well during the summit. I definitely, I think the youth-led panel was quite impactful and incredible. And all the work that you're doing on the ground, I think actions speak much louder than the words also. So, and again, looking forward, I think 2023 is the year when we need to implement everything from the summit, these key takeaways. So thank you. Thank you once again for all your contributions. Thank you. Now I'm going to invite Nikhil to make his presentation for the youth-led declaration on nonviolence.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Keshav Bhaiya. First off, I'm just really pleasure to be in the presence of people who actually care about non-violence and who are actually making a step. So in the beginning, I would like to start by reading out the preamble of this declaration which was formed. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King Jr. Recognition of inherent violence and discrimination on the basis of human rights is through education. And only through education can we start to build the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Indeed, the youth believe in the religion of love. We believe in tolerance. We believe in mutual respect of each other's identity rights. We believe in promoting a culture of empathy towards each other's needs, and we believe in the effort of understanding the particularities of the challenges that certain groups or minorities might face due to different racial, ethnic, national, religious, or social backgrounds. Furthermore, we believe in a society, including the digital environment, where youth have effective protection against antisocial behaviors. We believe in designed policies that focus on the well being of youth and foster their potential of being true leaders and ambassadors of change. The tradition of non-violence can be traced back to the ancient Taoist, Buddhist, and Jewish scriptures, as well as the philosophy of the New Testament and some of the resistance movements against the imperial edicts of Rome. It is mainly in the past 100 years that it has become an integral force in shaping people's lives and the political directions of their societies. At a time when humankind is confronted with clashes of national interest, religious fundamentalisms, and ethnic and racial prejudices, non-violence can be a well-trusted means of laying the groundwork for a new cosmopolitics. Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of humankind. It is the mightiest weapon devised by the ingenuity of man, Mahatma Gandhi said. Non-violent resistance, NVR, or non-violent action is the practice of achieving goals such as social change through symbolic protest, civil disobedience, economic or political non-cooperation, satyagraha, or other methods while refraining from violence and the threat of violence. Thus, the youth can bring a change in the violence that exists in the world by sticking to a declaration that articulates the understanding of non-violence in the context of world politics and by appreciating the historical perspective and principles of nonviolence. Moving forward, I would like to clarify with some key definitions which you guys will see. So the first is democracy. Then we have nonviolence, the principle of nonviolence, which can also be classified as nonviolence resistance, micro level nonviolence, meso level nonviolence, macro level nonviolence, politics, education, educational institutions, and then moving forward, informal education, formal education, compulsory education, voluntary education, and education curriculum. Now we come to the crux of our document, which are the principles which were outlined by us, the youth. So here are some relevant interlocking principles of active nonviolence, explaining why nonviolence works in the context of contemporary global politics. So, what actually is active nonviolence? Active nonviolence is choosing means that are consistent with our ends. Opposing violence by employing violence ourselves simply adds to the sum total of violence. Even when violence appears to succeed in the short run, in the long run, it often leads to revenge and counter violence, thus perpetuating the age old cycle of violence. Active nonviolence distinguishes between the act and the actor. Resisting the temptation to dehumanize our opponents avoids making enemies unnecessarily. The more we show respect for other people as human beings, even when expressing our vehement opposition to what they do, the greater the likelihood of them changing their behavior or even joining us, such as when insiders become whistleblowers. Active nonviolence seeks inclusive solutions. This principle does not mean compromising with injustice, exploitation, or violence. It simply means taking into consideration the legitimate needs of our opponents and trying to find ways to accommodate them without surrendering our own or others' equally legitimate needs or objectives. Active nonviolence rejects both retaliation and flight, refusing to flee or fight. The expected responses to conflict or violence can cause our opponents to reassess the situation and reconsider their options. Standing our ground without returning violence for violence and without backing down is the third way of active nonviolence. Active nonviolence chooses openness, transparency, and truthfulness. This principle is not absolute. Sometimes secrecy may be necessary in order to safeguard the life of others. In most situations, however, secrecy and deceit are not only unnecessary, but they are also likely to have highly counterproductive consequences for our organizations, our work, and our relationships. Active nonviolence transforms our anger rather than lets it transform us. Righteous anger in the face of violence, injustice, exploitation, brutality, and indifference is not only understandable but healthy. The question is how we deal with our anger. Through nonviolence, we can transform our anger into a positive force for constructive action. Active nonviolence exercises power by withdrawing cooperation. The authority that power holders wield is dependent on the continued cooperation of those with whom they wield power. When this cooperation is withdrawn, when people exercise their own power by refusing to cooperate, power holders lose the source of their power and the powerless become empowered. Next, we move on to the principles of education. And this is one major point which we have been addressing throughout the summit because education and only through education can we make nonviolence a big thing or certainly make it appeal to the masses. So, the process of education promotes peace, social justice, respect for human rights, and the acceptance of responsibility. To educate someone is to be highly educated in ourselves, which can develop into a sort of mindful training about peace, instant gratification. Avoid confrontations and provide conflict resolutions at both the individual and the societal levels for peaceful coexistence based on equality, tolerance, and social justice. Nonviolence as an effective way of dealing with conflict needs thinking, including lateral thinking, resourcefulness, vision, planning, patience, and commitment. Nonviolence helps shift the trend of violence on violence by educating people about empathy and mindfulness, even between people with completely different stances. Education for peace is education for cooperation, for caring and sharing. For the use of nonviolence in conflict solving, but an education that fosters competition, conquest, aggression, and violence is an education for war. Finally, education teaches us that the journey of acquiring nonviolence is long and vast, which is true in learning about nonviolence and peace. Being educated can take time, but putting things you learn every day into action is where the fight begins. Embedding the principles of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King into, into the education system will be quite useful in fueling this movement to promote peace and nonviolence. Some of the principles are: nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, uh, not people. Nonviolence holds that voluntary suffering can educate and transform. The nonviolent register has deep faith that justice will eventually win. The complete unity and integrity of the body, mind, and soul in the individual. Now, I think that we should open the floor for discussions since we already have read the preambles and some very important principles. So I would please like to pass on the mic to Mr. Keshav Gupta. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. And I think to even come up with these points, I must congratulate you and again commend all our members from our assembly, which actually led to this document. We will be inviting thoughts from any of our participants. And again, in the chat, we will be sharing the link to download these resources as well that have been presented today. So are there any thoughts, reactions, questions that any of you would like to share with us with regards to what Nikhil has presented so far? You can raise your hand or you can unmute and speak.
I think Edward wants to speak, Keshav.
Hi,
Ed, you have the floor, please.
yeah, just wanted to check first if I am audible because I'm outside, unfortunately. Is the sound clear for you?
Ed, the sound is not very clear. Okay, so while Ed fixes his audio, Devesh, would you like to maybe like give some remarks of your reactions?
Yes, so thank you, Keshav. So I was thinking about the presentation which was earlier made by Rahat and Rahul, and also linking it to the youth declaration which Nikhil has provided. And I was thinking about education being the root which can actually change the behavior at a local level and also at a global level, because at the end of it, it's the human being which has to change. The same mind has to act in the society in an interpersonal relationship and at a global relationship. So now how do we tie in such education, or how do we make it a part of everyday life? Because till now we have had the culture of understanding the ideology of non-violence, but the mind is not changing. People carry the knowledge of non-violence. They know that non-violence is important, but that knowledge hasn't changed the human mind. So what is that fundamental factor which we bring in, which we are calling that we will bring it into education, that will actually change the human behavior? Because in times of suffering or crisis or distress, human being does not care about principles or values, or those values just become more conflicting within the mind, but there is no fundamental root change. So I was wondering as to how do we bring that fundamental change into the human mind, so that, and can that be the part of right education?
Thank you for your remarks, Devesh. I think I also want to just very quickly, because yesterday was a very critical piece of news I heard before I slept in India in the time zone, is more tanks being committed from the Western countries to Ukraine which means including more weapons in the place as well. So not commenting on it politically in any way, but like I think we are seeing the escalation of violence in 2023 from 2022. The conflict is only going further, not both in its volume, but in its intensity, but even in terms of the anticipated time frame in which this current conflict invasion is going on. So I think that in this time, for our generation to talk about non-violence becomes even more important, and having a declaration like this is, I think, all the more needed. So I know Rahat is. If Ed, your audio is working again, you can speak. Otherwise, then we'll be handing the floor to Rahat for her comments, and then Nikhil.
Maybe try one more time.
Yes, please.
If it's a bit better. Thank you so much, and sorry for being outside during the call, but really wanted to listen in. I think just one reaction, and it's also a huge thank you to Rahat, because I participated in the session with her this morning around imagination for peace building, and was really kind of captured by kind of the rigor and the level of detail that she was giving about some of the outputs from the Turning Point Summit. And I think one thing that I'm really impressed with the report or the Youth Declaration is how it doesn't shy away from detail, and that it really does go into detail, which can sometimes be a challenge with collective declarations. And so I think it's a really foundational kind of educational document. And just the last thought was actually, I think in the education system around peace education, one of the things that seems to be coming up a lot at our Learning Fellow Festival this week has been how can we set up education that guides people in their specific contexts to find solutions, and that sometimes we go to the very end solution before figuring out how we can guide people through the process. And it seems particularly that peace education is a big example. And so my question, and something I'd love to explore and learn more about, is what would a guide for helping someone become peace or non-violence aware before even becoming a non-violent actor of change? We'd be really interested to hear further thoughts.
Thank you so much, Ed, for that, for your remarks and your question. I think I again want to just mention that I know that Nonviolence International and especially Michael Beer has just updated even Gene Sharp's work on methods of nonviolence in the 21st century, which I think again is a very critical piece of document. So we may be requesting David Hart, like if after maybe Rahat and a couple of speakers, if you do mention a little bit about that document, because I think that's a very important resource in our times for what Ed is also talking about. Rahat, over to you, please.
Thanks, Keshav. The one thing that you mentioned about the more tanks coming into the picture in the Russia-Ukraine war, I was at a defense conclave, and the generals there had this idea that, you know, this war has proven that war is not a thing of the past. And essentially that sort of triggered me in a very internal, introspective level. Why are we still considering war an option in this day and age? And essentially, I go back to the formulation of what our co-creation strategy looked like. And we had gone very deeply into the concept of introspecting and reflecting. And we started discussing this concept of evolutionary psychology. There is this general belief that a person's first instinct is violence. There's this general idea, this narrative that is there. And somehow evolutionary psychologists have theorized that you can take the man out of the Stone Age, but you can't take the Stone Age out of the man. And that's why we keep choosing we keep choosing divisiveness, we keep choosing classification just so that we survive. But let's be real, we have the sources and the capacity to survive and live healthy, fulfilling lives now. We are not constantly under threat. Essentially, we do not have to make those same decisions again and again, which were violent and divisive in nature. So could we, as a collective, the non-violent community as a collective, come together and insert this idea that there is a barrier between choosing that instinct? You can choose to introspect and reflect and consciously choose non-violence instead of violence. And that is why I think education as a foundational base is very important. Building that barrier from a very young age, and essentially for people who are not so young, who have gone through a conditioning process, we are using certain activities to help them unlearn that idea that they have to choose violence to get their point across.
Thank you, Rahat. I think that it's even in our academic and general understanding, we call something as realism, which inherently presumes a sense of violence, operation of power as realism. And then against that realism, we look at normative behaviors and so on. So I myself sort of find it that it's very important to change this vocabulary, change the narrative, understand, and again start believing that we are not just a species of violence in terms of solving our problems or living together. That's not the only way or the default way, and that there's something much better that we can expect from each other for each other. David Hart, if you would like to also just talk about that book as well.
Yeah, happy to raise this up. I'll show a physical copy and drop in the chat a link where you can get the book in several different languages. Just yesterday, we heard that the funding has come through to do a translation into Russian. And as you may know, Nonviolence International has a Ukrainian affiliate who's been doing a lot of reports on how to speak to Russians. They're available on our website, so getting this book into Russian feels meaningful to us in this moment. I think all of you are familiar with nonviolent tactics in general, and some with Gene Sharp's work that was mentioned. When I was in school a very long time ago, we loved Gene's book, but thought it was out of date. And Michael Beer, my colleague at Nonviolence International, has updated this book. And the world was very different when Gene was writing, so digital and online activism wasn't there. But the creativity and values around nonviolent tactics are important to us. As we noted, that with the series of problems we're facing, effective nonviolence doesn't just happen. It requires a deep knowledge of tactics. It requires training. So you'll also see on our website a training resource where people can learn. But we don't want it to be limited to these important elements that we think of as essential to nonviolence, training and tactics, but also to how all of the kind of stuff you're discussing now, how we rethink this. Is it realistic to think we can continue on this unsustainable path? In Washington, D.C., where I live and have worked a lot on Capitol Hill, it's always about what can pass this week or this month on the Hill rather than what the world needs. So in our work on nonviolent tactics, again, available free at that link in a variety of languages, we love your input on it. There's a nonviolent tactics database link there as well. And we'd love this to be an interactive conversation where some of you experiment with certain tactics and say, hey, this really worked for me, or I had a trouble, and be involved with this learning community to see any ideas for how we can more successfully implement this tactic. But tactics alone, we don't think are sufficient, training alone, but we do think these are essential elements. And Michael's book is one I recommend to you. While talking about NVI books, our founder is Jonathan Kitab, one of our co-founders, is about to head to the Middle East, home to Palestine. And he's also got a free book on our website that I'll drop in the chat, Beyond Two States. And for me as a Jew, standing in solidarity with Palestinians facing occupation is a really important series of tactics. And I hope some of you interested in that topic will also engage with that text. And again, share your thoughts, what's possible, what's not. Just last week, I had a conversation with some of the youth leaders at We Are Not Numbers. This is one of our fiscally sponsored partners in Gaza, and their bold, creative, nonviolent activism in the face of very difficult situation. You may know the Gaza Strip is one of the world's most densely populated areas, and there's a lot of beautiful, creative work being done. And with the changes in the world right now, US, all around the world, the new Israeli government is just chock full of unrepentant racists and haters. And I think we're going to need to step up our work, a deeper knowledge of tactics, more willingness to experiment, clearly what we've been doing isn't sufficient. And we need to talk to people who don't yet agree with us. I hope this work on nonviolent tactics will become meaningful to you, and urge you to engage with the book and the online tactics database, which I'll drop in the chat shortly. Happy to answer any questions or thoughts, but I've got a lot to say about this, but really do want to hear from all of you because this is your session.
Thank you so much, David, again, for all the work that Nonviolence International has been doing. And again, I think one of the key takeaways of this session is to have to look at concrete ways in which we can connect these resources to those who need them. And I think that bridging is extremely important as well. So we will all be benefited, and we will be sharing these resources, again, as Simon had mentioned, over an email with all of you. So Devesh and Nikhil, I think you had raised your hand if you want to make short remarks.
Nikhil, do you want to go first?
Yeah. First of all, Sir David Hart, you're actually a really big inspiration to me personally. Just seeing how one person is not even trying, he's actually changing the lives of so many people is just absolutely inspiring. Second off, I would just like to shortly address what Devesh Bhaiya said, that what can we actually change in education? Because I do agree that as kids and as people, we are educated that, yeah, non-violence is good, you should be non-violent. But I think that the one part which was missing there was actually the depth in which they went into, and second, the actions. Once you know that the action which is caused by non-violent is the only means for long-time peace and long-time love, I believe that non-violence will be a fool's decision to take over. Because one thing which I learned in the sessions was that whenever you build a society which is based on violence, it may stay stable up to an extent of time, but in the long run, when people's hearts are filled with hate, and in fact, when people uproar, then they uproar really fast and really hard. So, if we want to bring a society, or if we want to make a society in which every single member of the earth or every single person of the community is at least happy, fulfilled, and content, I believe that the only way to go forward would be through non-violence. And it would be actually making people understand this idea that the society which they belong to or which every single human being deserves can only be created through non-violence is when they will be actually inclined to adopt that. And since I have to keep this short, that is all for now. But still, a really great session. I really enjoyed it, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nikhil. Devesh, over to you.
Yes, very small observation. Like today is the Republic Day for India. And today morning we had a parade where we were glorifying weapons. At the same time, in different schools I go where principals want their children to be developing ballistic missiles for their own nations in the coming time. So one thing is that if at the core, at one level, we have a value of non-violence, which we are imparting to children. At the other end, we are teaching them to be nationalistic, separate, any identity to which they should identify. Then there is already a conflict within the mind of the child as to what the child is or where does the child belong. So the conflict is not really outside, but the conflict is within the mind as well, between different identifications, different desires. And from there, it's emerging, the violence in itself. Another thing which I would just like to talk about, I haven't read the book which Mr. David Hart mentioned, but generally, sir, it's my own observation that when we are talking about tactics or any practices, the mind which is trying to practice non-violence through any tactic, any response, is a violent mind. So it can imitate for a while, it can modify its behavior temporarily, but the root of it is still violent. It's like I'm wearing black clothes and then I do something, the black being violent, then anything I will do will still remain black. The color, I mean, you can take any color. So I've seen that there's a conflict then between what the person is and what he's trying to be. There is again a conflict within the mind when we have a practice or a tactic to adopt. That's all I feel, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Devesh. I think our concluding remarks, like we've reached the end of our session, so we will have Ganga as giving her concluding remarks before we close the session. Ganga, over to you.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna make this short since I actually wanted to talk about the last few principles from the declaration form. The last two principles highlights the talk of religion and how technology and civil society plays a role in nonviolence. So for the religion, it mainly talks about how youth should be engaged in mobilizing this movement against religious hatred towards vulnerable group. So if I should quote from the document, it says that society should be educated towards understanding the social cultural system of designated behaviors and practices in various religions. So basically, this document encourages authorities to create strategies that are orientated towards attacking the pillars of religious stigma and taking account of the harmful impact of hate-related trauma or acts of violence. And for the last principle, we relate nonviolence with the use of technology and civil society. So we talk about a lot of concepts about security and security secrecy through the development of technology. So that can help address many concepts of peace and nonviolence. We talk about protecting good civil rights and civil protection. That should be an absolute necessity in ensuring the idea of an open democracy. The importance of technology use should also be important when discussing how nonviolence can be promoted. So basically, the manner we use technology to connect to governments, groups, or any other organization that leads to the stability of nonviolence and peace in society. There's also a lot of mention of security secrecy and how we use this concept to indicate how open and clear a government should be to the public about the laws and policies the country is being run under. That's kind of the summary of the principles that we talked about. Obviously, the history as well, but it's a good read, the document, and it's a very concise and well scripted document. So I suggest everyone to read it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ganga. And again, what gives me hope is that if virtually people from different backgrounds, young people from different backgrounds can come together and create such a strong call to action, I think that's something that means that while all these complicated issues are arising in the society, there is also youth like all who are present here today, who are doing their very best in their respective regions as well as collectively to find solutions. I know Blair has raised his hand. So just Blair, you'll be our final speaker. And before I get Blair to speak, just my deepest gratitude to Learning Planet UNESCO for this wonderful idea of Learning Planet Festival itself, all the colleagues who made this possible, all our partners, colleagues, guides, who are here and who may not be here, but are again very important to the work that we're doing together. And we are definitely hosting a Turning Point Summit 2023. So please watch out for all of what's to come. Yes, with that, and to most importantly the presenters for today, Rahul, Rahat, Nikhil, Ganga, Simon, Devesh, David, everyone whose interventions have made this again very insightful. So thank you. Blair, over to you, please.
Yeah, hi, Blair here. I'll speak quickly, just to thank you to the previous speaker. Let me get my microphone situated here. A thank you to the previous speaker who spoke to issues of technology and its importance in how we develop our future practices. I think it can have a really important tool if we use technology well, and what was mentioned about it's the civil rights and civil protections of technology. and learn how to make that an open conversation between ourselves. It just oddly just a really important part of our future, how we develop as a society, and to develop, good democratic practices in this country. I think what we're trying to do in the U.S. It's an important goal at this time. The ACLU has some really good guidelines and examples I invite yourselves to look into. And if the person who spoke previously, if she could maybe put in chat the paper she mentioned. I didn't quite catch the name of the paper, and I'd love to read that paper. And just thanks a lot for the meeting today. I mean, I try to practice concepts of peace out of this work with the future technology. It is its purpose that open democracy works towards the concepts of our better human reasoning and peace. But you guys really go into, really how to address a nonviolent world using the practice of nonviolence in the future, and just peace. How do we go about that? And thanks a lot for your meeting today.
Thank you, Blair, again for your intervention. And once again, thank you to everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day ahead. And the next 2 days, the DIAS, as a part of Learning Planet Festival, is hosting 2 important events. Tomorrow, we are showcasing with the Human Potential Circle a workshop that we have done with young people on using technology and AI for good. And then tomorrow, we are also starting with the DIAS Global Voices Model UN, where we have over 200 young people joining in and discussing a lot of different issues with a basic theme from moving from citizenship to planetizenship. And we have several speakers from the United Nations, and several organizations will be joining and speaking as well. So please get in touch with me in case you'd like to join any of the events. And all these resources will be available. We will be emailing to everyone along with this video. So thank you so much, and happy International Day of Education.